Madad and Salgirah Mubarak. My name is Ruhee and welcome to my kitchen. In just a few short weeks, we'll be celebrating Maulana Hazir Mom's 84th birthday, but things are going to look a little different. But we've come up with some creative ways to continue the celebration, and that's why I'm here today, to help prepare you for the Salgirah Cake Showcase. We're inviting the entire USA Jamaat to put on your aprons and join your families in your kitchens to bake a special cake for Maulana Hazir Mom. All you have to do is take some photos and videos while you're doing it and submit them to potentially be featured during our virtual Salgirah celebrations. Head to the Smiley USA social media channels for more details on how you can submit your photos and videos. Until then, I'll be showing you some of my favorite decorating styles, tips, and tricks to help prepare you in the kitchen. Cake decorating can seem like a challenge for some people. Some people think you need special tools. Some people think you might need some formal training, but you don't. Trust me, I speak from experience. I started baking as a hobby just a few years ago, and I started experimenting with cakes, cookies, cupcakes, whatever you may call it, and it was just a stress reliever for me. But fast forward, and it's become one of my favorite hobbies and a creative outlet. So today, I'll be showing you some household tools that you can use to create a masterpiece without having to leave the safety of your home. Typically, what you see in a kitchen, in a baker's kitchen, are some fancy tools that sometimes cost a lot of money or sometimes you have no other use for, so there's no point of having them. Let's walk through some of them. So, probably the most popular, the most famous one is this piping tool. You've got piping tips like this. This is a star piping tip. And this is just your normal round tip. And these help you create some fancy piped frosting on top of your cake. So really cool tool, but not necessary. To go along with that, you have your plastic piping bag. Again, really not that fancy, but you usually won't have a use for it unless you're baking. A few other tools are, this is a cake scraper or alternatively a bench scraper. You'll see a lot of people using this when you're creating dough for pie crusts or biscuits, or the most popular use for a cake is to actually run it along your cake after it's frosted or while you're frosting it to get a very nice smooth edge. So that's that. Another tool like that is your straight metal spatula. This is one of my favorite tools. I think it's very versatile. You can plop on icing onto your cake layers. You can scrape it smooth on the side, apply it directly from your bowl. So definitely a useful tool, but again, not necessary. Another very popular and useful tool, and I think actually this might be my favorite, this is your silicone spatula. These are just three of many I have. You can use these in baking, you can use these in just regular cooking, but they're super, super useful. They clean up the bottom of your bowls and pans really, really well, especially with frosting. It typically tends to stick to your bowls or the bottom of containers. So when you have different sizes and different corners, like this one's my little mini one, it really can get to the bottom of the bowl and clean everything out and get you all the frosting that you have. So highly recommend getting one of these if you don't have one of them. And then aside from that, I have this right here. This is my cake table, my cake turning table. Not a necessary tool unless you're baking on the regular. I like it personally because when I'm creating decorations or frosting my cakes, instead of my arm going in weird directions, all I have to do is just turn my table, and it helps me get nice smooth edges, as well as it's easier to pipe decorations or add decorations while I'm going along. And then another thing is, of course, your cake board. So you can totally decorate your cake on a plate or a tray or whatever you might have. It could just be something flat. This I personally like, especially if you're taking a cake somewhere or if you just need something, disposable to throw away after you're done with your cakes. This is a great item, but again, you don't need it. Something I've done previously when I haven't had these on hand is actually taken a cardboard box and just covered in foil or some clean wrapping paper and just created my own cake board. And they still look really nice and they do the job. So you really don't need it. If you have it, great. If you don't, make your own. And then, of course, last but not least, you have your cake layers. And we'll get to this later. Now, I told you I'll tell you some household tools that you can use as an alternative to all of these fancy things. First up is your handy dandy butter knife. This does more than spread butter and jelly on your toast. You can use this very much like this scraper as well as this scraper. Just remember, if your butter knife has a sharp ridge right here with little grooves, you can use it if you're trying to go for a design, but I would recommend just going with the smooth edge right here, and you'll get a nice clean touch on your cake, on the sides of your cake, on the tops of your cake, but it serves a very similar purpose, just like your metal spatula. So handy tool number one. Number two is your handy dandy spoon. This is great because you can just scoop your frosting out of your bowl and plop it onto your cake. What I like about the back of this spoon is that it helps you create this really cool dollop or swoop look. So basically what you do is just put a bunch of frosting on the top and the sides of your cake and just swivel it around. And I'll show you how to do this when we actually get to the actual cake decorating part, but you just kind of swoop it around and it gives you this very rustic look without having the need for perfection. And that's why I like this spoon a lot. And of course, you can use a fork as well. Forks kind of help you get these ridges. If you've seen some of those cakes that have stripes, you can do the same thing with the fork. You can even dip the fork in some food coloring if you want for a colored look, and just smooth it around your cake and you'll get this colored look. So great tool to have. Now for the piping bag, all you need is a handy dandy zippy bag. Just fill it up with your frosting, push it down to a corner and just snip the corner, and it serves a very similar purpose as your fancied piping bag. You probably can't do a lot of this kind of stuff, get stars and stuff, but you can do round dollops, create edges if you need, which I'll show you how we do that. But yeah, super easy, and usually you can find this in your pantry. So I think that's really it. The next few items I'll show you some pantry essentials. We'll go through them as we're making the cakes, but it's everything from candy, cookies, cereal, fruit, even flowers. They'll be a part of our decor, so stay tuned. All right, so we're gonna get started with decorating our cake. So the most essential part of your cake is your cake layers. So you can either use a box mix, you can find your favorite recipe online and create your own cake layers. You can have them be round, you can have them be square, 6-inch, 8-inch, 9-inch, whatever you want. Just create your cake layers, make your cake layers. And what I like to do is, if I'm going to be stacking and decorating a cake, I like to do this a few hours earlier than when I'm going to decorate, or if you can, the night before. Why? You want your cake layers to be very solid and very firm when you start decorating. If they're super, super soft, they might start toppling over, or if they're really warm, your frosting's gonna start melting, and it's just going to become a very big mess on your workstation. So if you can, bake early, use a box mix, make your own cake, whatever it is, make it early, put it in the fridge. What I like to do is saran wrap them after they've cooled a little bit right from the oven, and then just stick them in the fridge overnight. So that's what I did last night. So I have my cake layers here. I have them on my cake board. The first thing we're gonna do is take our cake layers, and for a stable cake, you want very flat cake layers. So sometimes your cake layers won't bake quite flatly, and like you can see, my cake is a little bit round, right? It's not completely flat. And while you can stack it as is, but what I've noticed is that if it is a little round, when you start stacking, things start toppling over a little bit. So I'm gonna show you a very easy way to level them out. Again, you don't need a fancy tool for it. All you need is a knife. So, all right, so to get the nice edge on your cake to make it flat, I like to use what we call a serrated knife, or a serrated bread knife, or just simply a bread knife. The difference between this knife and your regular knives that you use in the kitchen is that it's got these ridges right here. And instead of smushing your cake all together, or even just your bread all together, what it does is it nicely cuts through it, and it gives you clean cuts. So this is what we're going to be using. And all you have to do is gently pick up your cake layer, and notice I'm not putting it directly onto my cake board just yet because I'm going to be doing some slicing. I put it on the saran wrap it was in. So you can hold your cake from the top like this, and then simply put your knife at an edge where you know you want to start cutting. So you can see my flat edge right here, and you can see where the round starts. So I know I want to cut off all this round part, so I'm just going to put my knife in a little bit, and I'm going to start spinning. And as I spin, the top is slowly being cut off, and I'm not actually moving my knife too much. So I know I'll get a relatively even flat cake top after I cut this off. And as I keep going, I just push my knife in just a tad bit, and bam, your top is off. And I can show you the flat cake you're getting right here. Very much flat, your round top is gone. Now you'll have a much more even and stable cake. So let's just do that with all 3 layers now. And I'm gonna gently move this down. It's nice to have everything individually wrapped. That way you can just use that saran wrap over and over again versus having to pull new sheets apart. So let's do it once more. This, by the way, is a carrot cake. Carrot cake does not, at least this recipe, does not have butter in it. So it's a truly oil-based cake. And what I've noticed with oil-based cakes are that they're much more softer and much more, I guess you can call them flexible. So you have to make sure that you cool these. Chocolate cake is kind of like this too. So very important to have a very strong and sturdy cake, especially if you're trying to stack and layer. Now, if you're only using just 1 layer and you're just, you just want 1, layer of cake versus 2 or 3 stacked on top of each other, then you don't need to do this step. But if you're going to add some decoration on top, then it might be helpful because then you'll get a nice smooth surface to add your frosting, and then all your decoration on top will be in 1 even layer versus like going over a hill kind of thing. So on our last layer now, same thing. Sometimes you see people using like dental floss. Sometimes you see people like jabbing Q-tips on, or not Q-tips, toothpicks onto the side, sorry. I've never tried those, but I'm sure they work just fine. But personally, I found this very easy. I don't have to pull out another tool, just a knife that's in my drawer, and it gets the job done pretty quickly. And there we go. And don't throw away your cake tops. They make for a great piece of decor or a great breakfast. So don't throw them away. All right, now we have our cake layers leveled. We're ready to move on to the actual stacking part. So the first thing I want to do is actually fill my zippy bag, or piping bag in this case, with some frosting, because we'll be using this to actually create a little bit of like a frosting dam between our layers to help stack them evenly. And I'll show you why, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So let's go ahead and take our frosting. Something about frosting is that while I make my own, you can totally use store-bought frosting. Nothing wrong with that. What I like about store-bought frosting actually is that you can elevate it a little bit by adding your own flavors or adding your own colors. So if you're pinched for time or just don't really care to make your own frosting, definitely a good way to go. So I'm going to just put some frosting in there. Make sure I get enough for both layers. I'll probably just end up using most of it. Better to have more than to have to fill it up again. I think that's such a hassle, but all right, so just zip it up nice and tight, get some air out. And so you basically want to get like a nice grip on it. You probably see a little bit better, but you see how the tip right here is starting to form the same tip as a piping bag? That's basically what you want to do. So got it, got my grip. This is closed for the most part. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, I'm not going to snip the edge just yet. I'm actually going to hold on and get my first layer ready. So what I'm going to do is actually pick up my butter knife. And if you have a little bit of frosting in your bowl, you want to take a little bit and actually put it on the base of your plate, your cake board, or whatever it may be, because this is going to serve as glue for your bottom layer. When you're decorating, when you're kind of pushing your cakes around, or even like after it's stacked, you want to make sure it doesn't slide off or move around too much. So I've added some glue frosting to the bottom of my cake board. And now I'm just going to gently place my bottom layer on. as much as a perfectionist I am, I'm not going to be too worried about centering it. I think I did a decent job. But if you really truly care, you can pull out a ruler or figure all that math out, but I'm not going to do that today. We're just going to leave it like this. I think it looks fine. So I've got my first layer on, and I'm just going to snip about like this much. You just want like thick enough, not something super small. You're not piping like letters or anything, but maybe like an inch, inch and a half off the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is actually go around the edge of my cake layer and pipe just a line of frosting. So might make a little more sense if I go around. So I'm going around, and you see how I'm making this nice little edge. That's what I want. And I like doing this because it helps, like I said, it helps create like this wall of stability and almost like a pillar for the top layers. And it's also great for when you're trying to fill your cake with like some sort of different flavor, like a jelly or a jam or a different frosting. This will help kind of give you a place to work in, and then it'll also help prevent all those fillings from seeping out. So this is a great technique I've found very, very useful. So we're gonna do this, and then I used a normal buttercream on the outside of this carrot cake, but I'm gonna fill it with cream cheese frosting. So I've got my cream cheese frosting right here. Depending on your cake, you can go as heavy or light on your frosting. What this dam also does is actually helps me determine how much frosting I need. I don't want to overdo it to where it's like seeping out. So I'm gonna make sure whatever frosting I put in here is actually in level with my little border outside. So I think I picked up enough. We can always add more on top. What I'm gonna do is take my butter knife and actually just start smoothing my frosting in between. And this is just gentle, like movement of your wrist, nothing fancy. You don't need a lot of pressure, just a little bit of light flicks of your wrist, and you'll get a nice even layer. And again, try to get as even as possible, because remember, when you stack the next layer on top, it's going to sit on this, and if one side is higher, then your cake will start becoming imbalanced. So try to get as smooth as you can. And I think I generally got as much frosting as my border allows for, so I'm just gonna call it quits here. There we go. So I'm gonna leave it like that. At this point, you can just keep stacking. Because this is carrot cake, one of my favorite things to do with carrot cake is actually add some nuts. Sometimes I put it in the layers, sometimes I just put it on top of the frosting. So I'm gonna do that right now. I'm just gonna grab some walnuts. Not necessary, maybe you can see better here, but not necessary. You can see how I just kind of broken them up. You can put them in a chopper or something and get them more fine, but I'm just gonna take a few pieces and just sprinkle them on my cake right here. I like a little bit of crunch in my carrot cake. So just a few walnuts. What you can also do is actually roast your walnuts in the oven for a few minutes. So if you turn your oven up to about 400 degrees and lay out your chopped walnuts or even whole walnuts or any nut that you want to use, and put it in the oven for about 7 to 8 minutes, you'll get a nice toasty flavor from the nuts, and I feel like they hold their crunch a little bit better when they're in the frosting. So that's an option. I didn't do that today, but if you have the opportunity, highly recommend it. All right, so we got our first layer done. We're gonna repeat the same thing with our second layer. Now, I'm just gonna put it down right there on top. This is really important that you get even. You want to make sure that it's in line with the bottom one, and it's also as flat as you can get it so that it's not tilting over one side and you don't have like a little bit of a little hump right here. So I think I did a decent job. I just nicely laid it on. So that's that. Let's repeat that process again with our frosting border. And this particular frosting right now is a little soft. It's been sitting out on my counter, but if that starts to happen to you, sometimes it's important to make sure your frosting is in a more solid state so that it doesn't start to seep everywhere. This is still workable, but I can see that if it sits out any longer, it'll start to melt. But all you have to do is just pop it into the fridge, not the freezer, just the fridge for a few minutes, and it'll be okay. So it's gonna go a little more quickly here. So we have a few other things to do today. All right, so same thing, just smoothing out my frosting here. And like I said, you don't need this turntable, but you can see how easy it is for me to not move my hand as much, where I can just move the bottom of this thing. So got a little too much here. I'm just gonna scrape it off and just put it back in my bowl. That's totally okay. There you go. And same thing, add a few more walnuts to this for the crunch. And that should be good. And I like to center the walnuts in the middle portion because if you put something on your border, it'll probably start to leak out. So just try to keep it into the middle one. All right, so for my final layer, because I'm doing a 3-layer cake, I want to flip it over. So if you can see here, this is the bottom of my cake. Reason being, when I stack it now, I'm gonna get this nice edge versus something I cut that may not be even. So if I flip it over, I'm guaranteeing myself a nice edge on top that I can use to get a smooth surface when I frost the end. So this is what it looks like. Voila. And like you can see, when I started stacking, this started spilling out, but it's okay because it's the border, the inside is not coming out. So totally okay. Now at this point, what I want to do is take some frosting, light layers of frosting. So I'm going to use my buttercream and just go around the edge and take any of this like frosting that's leaking out and just spread it across your cake layers. This doesn't have to be a thick thing, but what we're doing is crumb coating it. So crumb coating is basically applying a thin layer of frosting around your cake so that it traps in any of the crumbs that are coming off of the cake. So like you can see some of these crumbs leaking out, and I don't want that, especially if I'm going for a very smooth, clean cake. I don't want those crumbs to show. So I'm gonna do a light one just to show you here, but typically what you do after you're done crumb coating it is stick it in the fridge for about 20 minutes, and then you add your final layer of frosting. We're not gonna do that with this one because I want to show you a different technique on this, but I'm just gonna do a light layer. You can see how it just kind of acts like glue to everything on the cake. So just gently keep going around. And again, I'm using my butter knife, nothing else. Just using my butter knife, going around, taking more frosting as I need it, but sometimes you just can repurpose it from a different side of the cake if you've gotten too much frosting on one side, or you've got some spots where it's seeping out from the middle. Just keep going until you're satisfied and you've covered all the edges everywhere. You might have to turn your butter knife horizontally to get the bottom layer, but generally this happens pretty quickly. And you can see I've got some extra frosting here. I'm just going to take it, wipe my butter knife off onto my pan, onto my bowl, and that's really a crumb coat. So usually at this stage, I'll stick it in the fridge and let it cool for a few minutes, but I want to show you a different technique that doesn't require me to do it. So I'm going to take my spoon, and remember how I told you about creating these like swoops on your cake? That's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm just gonna go back into my cream cheese frosting because I have more of that. And again, I'm just gonna put some on, just in random ways. I might actually use my spatula to do this. Grab a little bit of frosting, put some there, a little more. And I can always just scoot it down to the edge if I need to, but just do this. And you can see, I'm just gonna create a layer first. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just create a layer and then start swooping your spoon. And you're getting these nice, beautiful like grooves in your cake that actually look very elegant. And sometimes you even see cakes like in bakeries that have this sort of design on it, and I think it looks beautiful. It just kind of shows you how like creamy and nice the frosting is. So personally love, love, love this style. And I think it's not done as much as it should be done. So just do that all around your cake. Some people call this messy. I don't think it's messy. I think it's this rustic look to your cake. So just go around, keep going. Does not need to be perfect. Trust me. This is also great when you're in like a hurry or you don't have as much time, to spend on your cake. This is a great way to make it seem like you've done a lot of work without actually having done the work. I'm gonna kind of cover that edge over there. Up, okay. Keep going. I'm gonna make sure I don't miss any spots. You can come back and do them as you need, but I'm trying to go as evenly as possible. I think this is working particularly well with cream cheese frosting. Cream cheese frosting tends to be more creamy and silky. It doesn't solidify as much as buttercream frosting because that's made purely of butter and sugar. So if you're looking for that swoopy effect, I think cream cheese frosting does a great job of it. Only problem with cream cheese frosting is that if you leave it out for too long, or if you're, taking a cake to a birthday party or something like that, or leaving it out on a counter, it'll start to melt and it'll start to get all too soft on you. So tastes delicious, but does have a few things to be mindful of while you're doing. So I think I'm almost done. Let's keep going. Yep. Just got a little bit more on this side, and then we're just going to top it with a few fresh ingredients to give it the final touches. All right, so I think I've missed a spot there. Right here. Okay. Yeah, so now I'm starting to kind of go up and down to get all of the edges on top and bottom. And I'm now getting this nice like swoop. And so I've done that, and now I'm just going to kind of go around and just do a few more swoops because I think it needs a few more rounds. I like the circular motion on this a little bit better than just the straight. Yeah, I like that on the edge a little bit better than something else. Yep, just cover that up. Like I said, you can't really make a mistake with this one. The point of this is to be a little freeform, but it still ends up looking very nice. And then some people are a little concerned about having rough edges, and I'll show you what you can do to kind of cover those up. Cool, so I think I like how the sides of my cake are looking. I want to do something a little bit different on top. So I'm going to pick my butter knife up again, and I'm actually going to smooth it out. Just another technique I wanted to show you. Smooth it out a little bit. Just try to get an even layer because the next design style kind of requires that. So just try to get a decent even layer. And then take your butter knife and start from the outer edge and start turning either your hand, or if you're using a turntable, just start spinning it. And as you can see, it's creating this nice little spiral look inside my cake. And you end up with this nice little design on top. So it kind of looks like a log. If it were brown, it'd look like a tree log, but this is the final kind of look I'm going for. It's a very rustic look, and we're just gonna add some finishing touches to it. So like I said, we're gonna add a fresh element. So what I'm gonna do is, when I baked this cake yesterday, I actually used fresh carrots. So for a little pop of color, I'm just gonna take some of those existing shredded carrots and just kind of sprinkle them on the side. Just make sure you wash your carrots before you use them. But otherwise, I think this just looks absolutely beautiful. The nice little pop of color you need against the white frosting. You can just pick them up as they fall. Just around the edges. I think that looks very nice. And then, do you remember some of the cake layers we had left? Well, this is a great opportunity to use some of them, the cake tops. I just like to kind of sprinkle some on top as well to kind of show that this is what the inside looks like. So, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's whatever you want this to be, but I think this adds a nice little touch and a good way to use your cake toppings. A cake I like to really do this with is the red velvet, because the red velvet outside is just plain white, but when you add these cake scraps to the top, really adds a nice pop of color. Yep. There you go. You could even do this on the bottom edge if you want, either with the carrots. And then I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of nuts inside, just in the center, to give it that final look. And voila, that is our first cake. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to have smooth edges. This is one of many, many ways you can decorate a cake. What I would recommend, which I'm not going to do right now, but maybe just cleaning up your edge with a napkin, so you get a nice clean board or a plate or whatever you're working on. But this is it. This is our first cake. Just give it a nice little touch here. You can see the detail on the edge like that. Great. We can move on to the next cake now. All right, now that we finished our first cake, the carrot cake, we learned how to stack it, fill it, and do a very easy decoration with your butter knife and your spoon. So the next cake I'm going to teach you is something a little more simple as well, something that's very popular these days, and it's the naked cake. So I've already got it started a little bit to help speed things up today. So I'm gonna clean up my workstation a little bit and bring out some new ingredients that we're gonna be using to help top our cake. Now this cake is a lemon cake. I personally love lemon cake, especially in the summer, but I just think it's such a fresh cake, and you can pair it with buttercream, vanilla buttercream, or you can pair it with cream cheese frosting, which is what I'm going to be using today. So I've got our cake here. I've got 2 layers already done. And what I've done is between each layer, I've created our frosting border, or a little frosting dam. And in this cake, I've done it for 2 reasons. 1, because I'm filling it with cream cheese frosting. And 2, I actually wanted to change this up a little bit and add something fruity in between. So this is a great way to make your cakes, whether they're store-bought or box mix or whatever it is. Adding fruit or jelly or jam to your cake really enhances the flavor and gives it a fresh feel. So what I did, and you can totally do this with whatever's in your fridge, but I've got some blueberry homemade jam here. This sounds very complicated. It's not. It's literally frozen blueberries. I threw them into a pot with some sugar, a little bit of lemon juice, and a little hint of vanilla, which you can totally leave out. But I just let it simmer on the stove. Smash some of the blueberries. You can even throw in raspberries or strawberries, whatever you might have in the freezer, or if you have them fresh. And yeah, I just let them simmer and I let them get thick like this, and voila, you have a blueberry homemade jam. Again, you can totally do this with something you have sitting in your fridge, whatever complements the cake flavor that you're doing. So I'm just going to add a thin layer to my cake top right here. I don't want too much because jams and jellies get very goopy. So we're just going to do a slight layer all around. Just make it even again. When I'm done with that, I'm going to add in some of my frosting on top. I just want just enough that it allows me to cover up the jam. And like you can see, if I didn't have this little border on the edge, my jam would be seeping out from the edges and spilling everywhere, and we do not want that when you're working with something like this. So same thing like we did previously. Just keep going around, smooth it out, make one even layer. There's a little bit of an unevenness going here, so I'm gonna try to fix that so my top cake layer sits nicely on here. And there we go. Easy as it can be. Super clean. You can't even see that there's blueberry in there until you cut it open. So this cake I'm not going to actually trim because it's so flat already. It just baked that way. So I'm just going to take it as is, but I'm going to flip it over as we did last time. So I flipped it over and I'm going to drop it onto the cake right here. And I think I got it about right as well. So this is looking pretty good right now. Now, like I said, this is going to be a naked cake. So what that means is that if you remember, we did a crumb coat on the last cake. It's basically what we're going to do here. We're just going to do a very thin layer of frosting on top, on the sides, so that you can just see the inside layers very clearly. Now this cake has become very popular recently just because it gives a nice, clean, rustic look. And for those who don't really like frosting, too much frosting, this is a great option because you don't get that extra thick layer of frosting on the outside. So same thing, we're just gonna start with a little bit of frosting on top and just let it seep onto the sides. So I'm just gonna use my butter knife again. And I might do it to where I have a slightly thicker layer on top. And the reason being is I do wanna top it with some fresh things. So like I said, we've already used some fruit inside and I want to bring that element on top as well. So I'm going to keep going like this onto the edge. I'm gonna have to definitely use more frosting from my bowl. Take a little more. Again, this does not have to be perfect. Just whatever's comfortable to you and whatever gets the job done. I personally like a naked, oops, look at that. I personally like a naked cake with vanilla cakes. I just think it looks very clean and nice. But even something like a red velvet cake looks beautiful because you can see the bright red in contrast with the white frosting, and it just is a very nice touch. So you just keep going around. Do a little more. The bottom edge is looking a little empty.